Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry we're late. I suppose Gloria is not here to keep us on time, but we do have the producer. I don't know why you couldn't keep us on time. Anyway, I'll answer for you. I was late.
Thank you, Tinashe.
My hair was in a disheveled state and I had to get a haircut, so I ended up at the barber.
And unlike last week, he wasn't jumping up and down and having a fit about starting the show without its star.
So I was zooming across town.
I think it's the teetotaling brotherhood, and I want to wag my finger at the producer. There should be fair and equal treatment of all talent.
You know what? I think Tinashe was just fortunate that today was a hectic day because of another show we were doing. So, he just caught me in a right mood.
Yeah. Not before you sent out an SOS and then you called me.
You see.
And the
only reason why he called you is because I was scolding him and saying, look, last week you were jumping up and down and you actually seriously considered not having me on the show because I was 5 minutes late, and look, Tinashe is running late, and you're just sitting there as if everything is dandy. Okay. So he called you on my BS.
All right, okay. Anyway, it's a cold winter day in Harare. I must say the last week it has been quite chilly. What's your experience?
Yeah, it's been quite chilly the last few days. Really chilly. I think it's because it's been overcast as well.
That's true.
Yeah, it hasn't been as sunny as I'd like for sure.
Yeah. Well, I suppose even the entire economy has been chilly and overcast. So I suppose there's a lot of foreboding there. Dickens.
Look, it depends with the lens with which you are looking at the economy, because others are excited, or maybe not excited, but they are seeing prices coming off in Zimbabwe dollar terms. The Zim dollar is gaining some strength. Surprise. So,
there you go. We've got lots to discuss. But let's start off. You're enthused by the 4th of July. So maybe
absolutely.
You can kick off by telling us exactly what's exciting you.
So it was the 4th of July earlier this week, and I decided I'm going to drink something American to celebrate. And I chose a bourbon, this Woodford Reserve. I think we've had it on the show once, but a different one. I like to, I'm inspired by the US as a successful entrepreneurial-driven economy, and even its founding was an entrepreneurial project. If you think about it, from the perspective that they were breaking away from what at the time was a stable and safe empire.
No, not because you are generally. You've got general affinity to neo-imperialism and everything. That's not.
There's that too.
Well, no. I mean, I think this idea of neo-imperialism, particularly in the 21st century, when people talk about it, they it's mostly propaganda, because the world has moved on from imperialism for the most part. Can you think of any outright imperialistic state today that just comes to mind offhand?
Well, I think it's always overt or covert, but anyway, that's a story for another day. I am sticking with Java House in East Africa. I'm having a latte made out of Arabica, Kenya. It's a medium roast. Smells divine. And that's what I'm going to have. Ranga, what are you having?
Arbitrage. At least this time around, I'm not drinking some water, so I'm just having some tea.
All right.
I don't know why we bother with you guys and what you're drinking.
Well, I think it's problematic when he has milk in rooibos.
Did you put milk? Oh my gosh!
And lots of
milk in
and lots of
rooibos.
sugar.
And sugar.
Of course.
How do people adulterate? Even heated shop juice?
I have no idea, but.
I mean, this is if Ranga started drinking, you'd probably be putting Fanta grape in whiskey.
Let's hope we get to 100 and see that happen. Okay, gentlemen, today's topic is an interesting one, and It has to do with dollarization. I think that's the topic of the moment. Everybody's talking about dollarization. Everybody's talking about what's happening in the monetary system. But what's topical in boardrooms and in beer halls and everywhere, even in kitchen parties, are we now a fully dollarized economy? Especially given the shortage of Zim dollars in the market. And we sort of put it out there.
I don't know that, it's a very interesting characterization.
Let me finish first.
Okay, all right.
Lay the land and then we can get in. So when you think about it, if you just read in between the lines, almost everybody is asking for US dollar. They want to be paid in dollars, right? The workers, the farmers, insurance sector, the premiums, they would rather it be paid in US dollars.
For sure.
Municipalities, we've seen that. Landlords, healthcare sector, rural economy. I mean, I was in the rurals and people are demanding dollars. They're not demanding Zim dollars anymore, except the government. The government itself actually wanted to be paid some of its taxes in actually Zim dollars, but there's a Zim dollar liquidity. But the obvious question is, as we are fast dollarizing, is it inevitable? Those are some of the questions we're going to ask. What happened in the US dollar era between 2008 to 2013? And we've got this nice graph that shows the deposits, and it sort of says no return. This was in The Economist. Zimbabwe's hard cash holdings as a percentage of commercial bank deposits. So this is actual cash in the system, and you can see that it started as 100%. So all the cash that was in the system was purely hard cash. But by 2010, it had reduced to about 50%. And you can see that by the end of the dollarized era, it was now around 20%. And it dwindled to less than 10% by the time we had the coup in 2017. So these are the obvious questions that people are asking.
That was not a coup.
Yeah, that too. These are obvious questions that people are asking. Does it work? Doesn't work? And there are a number of issues that we need to deal with. And it's such a topical issue. Everybody keeps asking the same questions. So, courtesy of the producer, it was decided that let's delve into this and let's actually see what comes out. We don't know what comes out. I mean, I'm not a big proponent of dollarization. I actually prefer the currency board, but the market is speaking and we must listen to the market, and the market is going full dollarization. So having, contextualized and put the question there, and I'll start with you, Faro, because you've been a big proponent for dollarization. So on the panel, let's make it very clear that we've got a big proponent of dollarization, and in a formal sense. And then I sit somewhere in the middle. So there are certain components that I believe in as far as dollarization is concerned, which is a hard budget. So those restrictions, I certainly believe in it. But I also then think that a currency board is probably the halfway house where we can still use Zim dollars in our domestic market, and we are stronger as far as the currency is concerned. As far as our reserves are concerned, these are held outside of the country in hard currency, and anything that we issue, any Zim dollar that we issue, is backed by hard currency that is auditable and sits outside of the country. Then we have the producer. The producer is a big proponent of Zim dollar, that we must have our currency. We must. And there's a lot of around diversity financing and also just a looser monetary system. So obviously, given the reforms, so he's not saying that it should be carte blanche. He's arguing that we should have the systems and a reformed RBZ. Let me make sure that I'm capturing your argument correctly. You're saying that with the right monetary system, a Zim dollar can exist in the country.
Yeah, certainly. It's always very difficult to run any economy with foreign currency. So while it may look good, maybe as a short term, more like a short gap measure to dollarize, long term is not what we want to do. So I guess if we are to address this issue once and for all, we should rather be pushing for let's deal with the elephant in the room, which is generally how we've been running our economics. And I think when we do that, we should be able to get the results that we want. So yeah, long term, we certainly need our own currency. Obviously, it needs to be managed better. And yeah, that would be my argument.
All right. No, fantastic. So we will start with you, Shumba. Pazese. Tell us, why dollarization? Besides the obvious that it's inevitable right now, we're all dollarizing. But why are you a big proponent of us dollarizing?
Well, primarily it's because I don't believe in fairy tales. So I think I think a currency board would be fantastic. And I think that the scenario that Ranga describes, where we've got a Zim dollar that actually functions and is managed properly, that's also fantastic. That would be great. But given the historical precedent, right, over, it's a fairy tale, right? We have shown consistently over the last 10, 20 years that fiscal and monetary discipline is not something that we have. So the only way that discipline can be imposed on our economy is if we actually dollarize. And when we dollarize in 2009, it's not because the powers that be sat down and said, look, we think it's a good idea to dollarize. It's because faith and confidence in the local currency had been so completely destroyed that nobody in the economy accepted the local currency. And sadly, I believe that's where we're heading. So it's not so much that I'm a proponent of dollarization. I just feel that
it's inevitable.
It's inevitable. I think that's the realistic worldview, that Zimbabwe is going to dollarize again.
Okay. And if it's inevitable, if I correctly capture, you're also then saying, why don't we formalize the use of dollars rather than it being just US dollar cash, which is cash dollarization, which is a la Somalia and not Ecuador.
Yeah.
But what you're a proponent of is dollarization under the Ecuador framework.
Yes, why? Because you see, there's a lot of pain and suffering that's happening because of the dual currency system and all these rules and regulations that make it incredibly difficult for people in business to make decisions and operate. We would be so much better off if we didn't go through the rigmarole of being in denial about the future of the Zim dollar and just accepted that, look, we're heading towards dollarization and do it.
Okay. That's very compelling. But Ranga, 3 bouts of hyperinflation in 15 years, twice in 5 years. We've destroyed our savings base. We've destroyed, it's very traumatic. I mean, just going through that process as a business, as a country, and as individuals, it's extremely traumatic. And we're starting to see the effects of 3 times hyperinflation. Why do you think that the Zim dollar can still be sustainable in such an environment?
Oh, well, I think we just need to look around and see what other countries in the region probably are doing. So I think it's more what we do when we are managing our currency, which we need to change. And obviously that history and experience of 3 bouts of hyperinflation in the last 15 years, I think there must be lessons that we learned. And it's very clear right now, where we are right now, before the new policy measures were announced, that it becomes very, very difficult to run and manage a currency if you don't have a certain level of discipline. But also at the same time, it's actually difficult to try and plan the economic development issues based on a foreign currency, because it also creates problems of its own. I think issues around money laundering, or also issues of just people coming here just to come and pick up the dollar, and unnecessary importation because of that. So we'd want a situation where we have got proper fiscal monetary policies that we have in place, and then be able to anchor a local currency, and then just leave the foreign currency to so trading activities, importation and exportation.
Okay, fantastic. So, Ranga, the question I would have for you, and especially those that are big proponents of the Zim dollar, is this: that everywhere across the world, if somebody really believes in their local currency, the obvious thing is they will hold reserves, right? Zimbabwe hasn't held reserves for over 20 years now. So if, never mind what's happening on the auction, which we know that it's a managed auction, it's actually not an auction. They're trying to fix the prices. So there is no confidence building in that. In fact, the market has reacted violently to what the RBZ and Treasury are doing by actually holding more dollars. But outside of that, if you're an analyst from Botswana, from anywhere in the world, if you were to analyze Zimbabwe and you were told that they have their own currency, the natural question you have is, what are their levels of reserves? And then you hear that they've never had reserves for the last 20 years. We don't have an import cover. You can see what's actually happening in Kenya, for example, that the Kenyan shilling is taking a beating, but they actually have 6 months worth of reserves. South Africa has 5 months of reserves. Russia has 23 months of reserves. China has close to a year worth of reserves. So how do you instill confidence when you can't do the basics of exchange rate management, which is you must have import cover, you must have central bank reserves?
Yeah, so that's one of the problems that we are facing, and I think in addition to the issue of the reserves that you are talking about, I think we also just need to interrogate how we get to spend our foreign currency, because we don't have a a generating problem. So we have got exporters. We do export and we do have the diaspora remittance coming through. So when it comes to the issue of the supply side, the generation side, we actually punching way above our weight. But the biggest problem that we have are the leakages, and the leakages are coming through some of the policies that are not favorable, and one of them is actually the auction. So the moment that you try to have a mechanism that controls the movement of currencies, then you create arbitrage opportunities, yes. And that's why I believe that maybe with the experiences that we have had in the last 15 years, it should be very clear to all and sundry now that things like auctions, controls, and things like that, they don't work with the currency. It just puts you under pressure. So we don't have the reserves, but it's not like, when you look at this economy and what it can do, it's not like we don't have the capacity to be generating these reserves, but we've been wasteful.
But that's why it's
a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale.
Because if you can't do the basics of every month you produce your reserves, you say this is our import cover. Every other country does it. If we go through an IMF STP and we have a local currency, the first thing that they will ask is, what's your import cover? Before an investor comes into Zimbabwe, the first thing that they will look at is that number. And what they will see is it's either it's a negative number or there's just no data. In fact, the interesting data that I saw was on Afrexim Bank. They put Zimbabwean reserves at 0, and they were lending to us. They were in a naked position. Shuba, please, why is Ranga still, and a lot of others, still in this fairy tale that the Zimbabwe dollar can be sustained without all these things that we've talked about?
Look, I think, he's correct that Zimbabwe's got this phenomenal potential. We export, for example, much more than Kenya, but the Kenyan currency is actually stable and they have reserves. We don't. So, I think it's just one of the, life's difficult challenges is actually accepting reality, accepting who you are, accepting and understanding your limitations. And I think that, we like to say Zimbabweans are highly educated, but notwithstanding that, when it's come to managing our own currency, again and again and again, we've come short. And instead of Einstein actually, that saying, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
And hoping for different results. We should just accept our reality that we have no fiscal and monetary discipline, and we are better served by using US dollars because it forces us. That the only time that we've ever actually been disciplined from a fiscal perspective is when we were dollarized.
Okay, so we're going to look into that, what actually happened between 2009 and 2013. But before we do that, there is the obvious question that everybody has. Do you have countries in the world that were dollarized and then went back to a softer currency? I mean, I on top of my head, I can think of Israel.
Yes, I think it's the only country in the world.
It's the only country in the world.
And that's an exceptional country, actually, if you think about everything that they've achieved as a country. So I think, and one of the things that I think we're having a conversation about something else where you're saying, look, we should not focus on the exceptions. We should actually look at what is normal.
The general.
The general.
You've got something to say?
Yeah. So it's very interesting. I don't think it's lost on them, the authorities, that what needs to happen before we can get the Zim dollar back, or it's already here, but to get it as a sole currency. So I'm just looking here at some article 7 years ago when Governor Mangunjka was actually responding about whether the Zim dollar was going to be introduced, and he was saying Zimbabweans should understand that the introduction of bond notes doesn't mark the return of the Zimbabwe dollar through the back door. We can't just say the Zim dollar is returned when we haven't achieved macroeconomic fundamentals or conditions that allows us to use our currency. So it's they know. And then he went on to say the key economic fundamentals or condition for the return of the local currency involve balancing the export bill against the bill for the import bill and etc. So the whole issue about having the reserves and so they know the theory, they know what needs to be done, and I think obviously they reneged on a number of occasions. I don't know, maybe this thinking, the view that no, we don't want to follow bookish economics, but I think with what they've tried to follow, I don't know what type of economics they're trying to go with. The results are there. It doesn't work. So I think it's important that even as they are pushing to have the Zim dollar as the sole currency and things like that, they also need to have conversations around what needs some preconditions, things that we need to have in place before we can start achieving that. Because if not, we still have this thing. It becomes a vicious cycle.
And yeah, I will side with Ranga.
Surprise.
Really?
Yeah, no, but what Ranga is saying is exactly what happened in 2008 to 2013. That if you don't have certain structural reforms, even if you have formal dollarization, these guys will just end up again going back into hyperinflation. They will inflate the balances, the US dollar balances. It won't be US dollars anymore because we haven't dealt with the core issues, the core reform issues, which everybody knows. We must deal with the core reform issues.
Yeah,
and that's
I hear you.
So as far as Ranga is concerned, I agree that even if we formalize dollarization, there is still a big risk that these guys will bastardize the dollarization because there are no reforms that have been implemented. Maybe you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about that, because we didn't just move back into Zim dollars in a structured way. It was kind of, we woke up one day and what were US dollar balances became Zim dollar balances. And I think that this time around, when we dollarize, I don't think that we will ever be able to dollarize in the fashion that we did between 2009 and 2013, because one of the challenges with doing it like we did during the GNU is faith and confidence in the banks. People who had this experience where they physically deposited green notes into their bank account, and then one day woke up and were told that actually it's Zim dollars and it's worth 50% less than what you actually deposited, or some people are actually unfortunate enough to have their whole savings wiped out. So I don't think that we'll return to that dispensation where people bank formally, unless the banks outright declare that this money is going to be always held in cash or offshore in nostro. I don't think, and there is actually talk that's not speculation around the banks looking at treating US dollar nostro balances differently, to say this is backed by cash or money offshore in a nostro, and this one not so much.
Okay. So, and I agree with you. I do not think that even if we dollarize, what we're really talking about is cash dollarization, that people will keep their cash in Zambia, Botswana, or offshore, or under the pillow, or under the mattress, whichever they prefer.
National Mattress Bank.
Yeah, and not in the formal system. There's maybe the formal companies will keep their money, but the bulk of the money will not be in the formal system. So that will actually hamstring the full formal dollarization. So there I agree with you. So, and this is what I'm saying, that I pick some of what you're saying and I pick some of what you're saying. And I'm saying that what might actually be feasible for both parties is a currency board, because in a currency board where our reserves are auditable and are held at the ADB or South African Reserve Bank, at least everybody, every morning, everybody will know and can see that, there are our reserves. So whatever Zim dollar is issued is only against those particular reserves. And, okay, maybe South Africa Reserve Bank, people may have issues there, but I think the ADB could do a better job in auditing our reserves and in ensuring that whatever is issued, I think that the politicians, what they're afraid of, right, is that they will not have the control over the monetary system. But I still think that they will have, because we're actually receiving a lot more in terms of foreign receipts into the country. And as long as we're receiving more, they'll be able to issue more Zim dollars. So that actually helps them as far as the local economy. You're only trading in the Zim dollar. But as far as Rufaro is concerned, it has to be a hard budget. We have to restore faith and confidence. And the only way you can restore faith and confidence is not about what you say. And I totally get that.
Yeah,
it's about what you do.
So the digital token is a missed opportunity in this regard, because if what was missing from the announcement for me, which made me basically write off the entire endeavor, is
yeah, being tight.
While I'm being factual, is that they did not have a mechanism of openness or transparency where they could have appointed one of the big four firms, for example, to issue weekly reports saying, there's so many digital tokens in issue, and at venue X there's a vault and it actually has gold that is backing up this number of tokens in issue. If that process was there, that engendered confidence that there actually is physical gold in a vault somewhere underpinning the tokens in issue, then over time people would have confidence in them. But the way they were issued, it was, take our word for it, there's gold somewhere backing this up. And the person who's saying take my word for it, they've destroyed savings twice in 2 decades. So why would anybody take their word?
Okay, fantastic. So what we're going to do is just talk about the dollarized era, 2009 and 2013. And as Rufaro, and I think I agree with Rufaro there, that if we do have a dollarization, remember in 2009, and this is important for the audience to remember, that it was forced upon us. Government only reacted to dollarization. They didn't want to dollarize, but it was forced upon the market. And kudos to the government of the day that they actually, took what the market was actually saying, and then they just formalized it. But the market was dollarizing, and we're seeing it again, that the market is dollarizing on its own. it does not require the government to come in. But let's go back to that period. And here I want to marry both your thoughts. How much of the success between 2009 and 2013 had to do with the dollar and had to do with the government of the day, that you had a system, a GNU, where certain economic reforms were actually instituted, not to what we would want, but somewhat the fiscus and the monetary system was, according to you, a hard budget. You eat what you kill, if you remember. So they instituted the right principles. So how much of that success between that period was due to the dollar, and how much of it was due to the principles that we're talking about, a hard fiscus and a steady monetary system?
I think the biggest part was the general goodwill that was there because of the GNU at the time. That fact is actually supported by the amount of flows that we saw on the market. I can give specifically an example, say on the capital markets. We saw quite a lot of foreign money coming into this country. And I remember that time as fund managers and brokers, it was fairly easy to go do a roadshow in South Africa, in London, and in these other European markets, selling the Zim story. So there was great excitement. There was a lot of buy-in. And I don't have the figures, but I also remember the statistic that the Bank of International Settlements, they track the amount of deposits of money that's held by citizens in foreign banks. That number actually came off. So even Zimbabweans themselves that ordinarily would park their money offshore because of safety issues, we actually bring money into the country. So there was that goodwill, which
so it was goodwill in the governance,
yes,
in the political governance of the country,
exactly,
and not necessarily goodwill as far as the monetary and system.
No,
okay,
not at all. Okay. And the monetary and fiscal system then just came to sort of buttress and support. And I thought investors and everyone alike liked the idea of or eat what you kill mantra for the simple reasons that over the years we had demonstrated lack of discipline. So it spoke to some discipline, which is what has really created some of the problems that we are now discussing.
Okay.
So I think that was a bigger issue. What the dollar then did was to give you the stability, was to support everything that was happening by providing the stability in the transacting.
Okay.
Yes. So
what would you say to that?
I have a different take. I think that the economic growth that we saw in the GNU was because of the dollar and in spite of the government of the day. People just made risk return assessments in hard currency, and it made sense to do a lot of business in Zim. Remember, in the period leading up to 2009, we had managed to shrink our economy by 60% in the decade before that. Zimbabwe's own lost decade between 1998 and 2008. We remarkably shrunk our economy by 60% while not at war, right? So there was plenty of opportunity. The supermarket shelves were empty. We're coming off a really low base. And the opportunity to bring money into Zim and get a return was very attractive. And the money came in, and it was getting the returns, and it was in hard currency. And I will say it was in spite of. The Treasury gets a lot of credit for eat what you kill. It wasn't a clever strategy. It was, they had no choice. They could not borrow. Right?
Yeah.
They did not have
budget.
They did not, and in fact, I would be quite critical of how Treasury behaved, because if you think about the period leading up to dollarization, 2008, right? You had a civil service that in some months they were effectively earning less than $1 a month, right? And because it took time for US dollars to flow into the formal system in which they were accessible to the taxman, for several months in 2009, at the beginning, civil servants were on vouchers, right? The government didn't even have cash to pay them, right? But things improved in terms of the liquidity of this US dollar. And what Treasury did in its infinite wisdom was decide that as receipts were improving, they're going to give the civil servants an increment every time that, so you literally saw revenues going up through, for most of the GNU, and you had the Treasury was spending 90% plus on recurrent expenditure. We had the best paid civil servants in sub-Saharan Africa. So it was eat what we kill, and let's literally all every last penny. None of it was invested into savings, into reserves, into infrastructure or capital projects. It was let's just pay people.
So I think I'll push back on the return argument. But remember, okay, fine. Say we let's go back to 2009. So there is no demonstration of good returns that is already there. This is a country that is coming from a very serious bout of hyperinflation. All that has happened is there's a new framework of governance which is there. For the first time, you've got two leading political parties in one place singing from the same hymn sheet as it were. So there was no return in fact, if you could talk of return, it was more the prospects. And I would want to argue that the prospects were actually being driven by what the investors and people were expecting that the administration of the day was going to do. But look at it this way. For a foreign investor, really, in as much as one could make an argument that they would love a dollarized economy because there is a stability and you know exactly what you get. Even a situation, as long as the return prospects are good, even when you don't have, you are using own currency, the investors still come because they might actually benefit from the currency movement as well. So the return to an investor is the local return that this particular asset is generating, but also the return that they could make on the currency trades themselves. So it was actually that bit, because when you want to see what really happened, why we then saw an exodus of investors after that. I don't think it was merely an issue of the rate, but of the currency, because we continued with the same dollar, but we then had elections with the US dollar rate, and we had an election in 2013. All of a sudden, the controls that were there, where even the president of the day, the time President Mugabe, would say no, he wanted to do something, but his Minister of Finance would not allow him to partake or to spend on that particular line. That was a control which the investor would look at and say, okay, there's going to be some discipline. The moment we lost that, that's when we started as
investors moved on. He makes a very strong point, and Shumba, you need to support with evidence here. So if I capture what Ranga is saying, is he's saying that actually the goodwill was predicated on the political system of the day, right, and not the dollar. It was not the growth of the economy was not anchored in the dollar. If it was anchored in the dollar, then why didn't the dollar then continue? Because you're saying the dollar helped the economy in spite of, right? But if you're saying in spite of, the in spite of left in 2013, and immediately investors scurried away. Why didn't we continue? Because we had the dollar. And yet what we saw post 2013 is we started bastardizing.
No, so, okay, look, I think, Miranga's onto something, but we didn't actually see significant contraction in 2014, 2015, 2016. Actually, the problems began in earnest in 2016, 2017, when your bank balance stopped being US dollars. And that's when, things really started going south. But
so just hold on. If the producer could put that screen, the deposit and the cash holdings. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Just to support your point, if you actually look at the US dollar cash, actually it was stable in 2014. So it was stable at some rate, and it's only the later part of 2015 and 2016 that's when
that's when things came apart. That's when you
The
had
seams came apart,
you had like, so on in terms of the portfolio flows that he's talking about, you had a guy in London or Joburg who owned a blue chip account on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, and they were due a dividend, and they wanted the money wired out of the country, and it wasn't moving. And that's like that's a red flag, where people say, okay, there's a problem here. And that's when you started seeing the portfolio outflows. That's when you started seeing the problems. And so I don't think it had much to do with politics. I think, like if we just zoom out and we just think about global capital markets, what they are is not moralistic or particularly concerned with politics. They look at the world in stark risk-return terms.
Okay. All right. And just to buttress what happened during that period, we'll drill down again on the benefits, but it's always good to look at the statistics. And this is an interesting one because the people that are telling us that we shouldn't dollarize are some of the manufacturers. But when you look at the manufacturers, if you look at the GDP in 2009, they were sitting on about $1 billion US. And by the time it got to manufacturing, by the time it got to 2013, and that was the highest GDP that they got, was about $2.4 billion US. And during the Zim dollar era, which we've had for the last 5 years, they haven't grown. They've actually been slightly less than that. So the best time for the manufacturers was actually during that period of dollarization. So I don't know why the manufacturers then tell us that they prefer the Zim dollar. When you look at the numbers, the hardcode numbers, it's telling us that they did well. Let's look at an interesting one here, which is mining, agriculture. We see the same thing again. They did phenomenally well. They haven't grown. They've grown slightly during the Zim dollar era, but we've actually increased in terms of capacity. We've increased. But the reason why they haven't, if we had continued on a dollarized era, so if you look at the mining, it's about in 2013 when commodity prices were low, they were doing about 1.2 billion US dollars in terms of in present dollars. It's closer to 1.5 billion. I think now they've done slightly better than that. They're now around 2 billion. But if you think about it, at around $2.2 billion with increased capacity, because there's a lot more mining that's happening now, we should have doubled that number by now. So they have been hamstrung because of the Zim dollar. If you look at agriculture, again, a classic case whereby what we're producing in agriculture in 2013 was actually one of our very good years. Right, 2014 actually was one of the best years we've had in terms of agriculture, in terms of output. And this is without the subsidies. This is without world prices or commodity prices that are just out of this world. I mean, right now you have maize being sold in Zimbabwe at 350 when internationally it's at 200. But you didn't have those subsidies. And yet agriculture was producing quite a bit. So what it tells us is, during the dollarized era, and we can argue whether it was the governance or it was the dollar, but what we know is that our economies or the sectors were actually pumping. They were profiting. If you look at wholesale and retail trade, similarly, you saw it grow to around 3 billion. That has actually done relatively better. So of all the sectors, you tend to find that wholesale and retail actually does better in a Zim dollar era. And yet they still prefer US dollar, but they are the only sector that post-dollarization has done relatively better, has actually grown.
Yeah, but that's not because things are better for them in a Zim dollar era, it's because they were getting subsidized currency, because a lot of what they sell is imported.
That's manufacturers.
No, I'm talking about wholesalers and retailers, right? Because what are you wholesaling, right? What percentage of your stock are you acquiring locally, and what percentage are you importing? And if you're a big
that's a very good point.
If you're a big corporate wholesaler, you're getting at one point the auction was paying 30 million plus a week, right? Where was all this free money going to? Well, it's not free, but the subsidized money, right? And a lot of it was
the subsidized products were ending up at the shelves.
So you sell more, and your margins are better. Everything is better.
Distorted. Okay.
I guess the argument is very theoretical that manufacturers are putting there, which says a local currency, especially a weak local currency, makes your exports cheaper. It makes you competitive in the global stage. But I think that argument is actually not very complete, because they want cheap, a weaker local currency, but still being able to access subsidized currency. You see? So I think that's why I think that distorts even the argument that they are making. So most of them, the reason why they would want Zim dollars is they want to be able to pay their employees in dollars. They want to be able to pay for certain expenses in Zim dollars. But every time that they want foreign currency, they will then resort to going to the central bank and getting it at a subsidized rate. So I think for me, it's less a currency problem, but it's more
entitlement.
Yes, entitlement, and also the general fiscal indiscipline, and also not just fiscal, or even businesses themselves. I think Zim business sometimes they can be dishonest. They are benefiting from the system. So by system here, for example, is the auction.
The manufacturers.
Yes,
for sure.
They go to the auction. They're getting cheaper currency, and yet they want to pay their employee. It's more subsidized wage in the sense that you are paying them in Zim dollars as well. That makes them. That is actually a demonstration. It shows that they are generally not competitive, even without opening the borders and all. So I think it's a typical case of people wanting the.
Okay, so the question I have for you, Ranga, and you got into the auction, so you invited it, is how do you ensure that if we do have the Zim dollar, that there are no arbitrage opportunities, that there are no subsidies, that none of these shenanigans that we've seen and the charades that we've seen over the last 5 years happen? How do you ensure that it doesn't happen? Because the sure way that it does happen is having the Zim dollar. Because suddenly when you have the Zim dollar, then you have to exchange the Zim dollar to the US dollar, or whoever has the US dollar must now exchange into Zim dollar. And every time that happens, that's when you have all these shenanigans.
I think it's there's one aspect that you've left. It's not just so just having the Zim dollar is not a problem. It's about the system that you have in place in terms of its exchangeability into foreign currency. That becomes a problem. So if we had a situation where we don't have some of these structures or policies where there's actually a person that wakes up every day, they are bathing, their job is just to allocate currency without really paying attention to how the economic agents what they want to pay, we won't have these problems. So that's why I'm saying, even as we are discussing the issue about bringing back this to make sure the Zim dollar is the sole currency, I think at the very core of that, we need to have fiscal discipline. We need to have certain preconditions. And these are the issues that Mangunja in 2016 was actually highlighting, that no, we need to be able to generate enough foreign currency so that we can pay for legitimate imports, which is another big issue. So we have got so much of the what's recorded
What
as
is
imports.
illegitimate import?
Okay,
Illegit-
let me unpack my argument.
Yeah.
Maybe legitimate is not the proper term. It looks very legalistic, right? But
yes, we know you're at law school, but
okay, so we're saying if you look at the whole basket of imports that we're making right now, I would say a significant proportion of that, hazard a number, whether it's 30-40% of that, they're actually not necessary. It's someone who is actually taking advantage of the policy environment which is there. So you can get foreign currency if you can show that these products that you can bring here are on the priority list. Why waste your time doing farming and other things when you can just go buy some stuff in South Africa, which is on the priority list? And for you are not really intending to make money from selling, but the arbitrage opportunity in the foreign currency. So they're actually encouraging rent-seeking behavior.
you also bottle of whiskey.
Yeah. They are actually encouraging rent-seeking behavior by having this distorted way of currency allocation. So to answer you, the legitimacy in the imports are those imports that ordinarily, if we didn't have arbitrage opportunities, those two would be necessary to be to be undertaken.
Yeah, okay, let me help you with the argument there. He's actually saying that if it was a free market, our imports would exactly match our exports.
Yes,
If it was a free market.
for sure.
But right now, from the goods perspective, we are importing 8.6 billion and we're only exporting 7.5 billion. So there's $1 billion worth of goods that we're importing that is subsidized, has nothing to do with economics. And if we had a full liberalized market, that market would square. And if that market was square and you had fiscal discipline and you had monetary discipline, never mind that it's a tall order, then everything will be fine.
Calling it a tall order is being generous. It's a fairy tale. That's what it is. And I'm amazed that he's articulated all of these challenges and he still believes the fairy tale, right? It's just not going to happen. One of the things that's remarkable about Treasury and the central bank in our country over the last decade or so is that they say all the right things.
And they know the right things.
If you had no data about what's actually happening on the ground in the country, and you just read statements from Treasury, you'd think this is a fantastic country. It's run, brilliantly. These are, excellent.
They say all the right things.
Yeah, we say all the right things. Where we come short, doing.
You see why, in a way, you are indirectly making my point when we just started that it was more the politics which actually
were involved in this decision. Well, I think what simply happened was that the banks between 2009 and 2016, when 2016 when the wheel started falling off, is the banks were managing their balance sheets independently. So what I mean by that is that it was up to them to manage how much cash they had locally and offshore. They did not have significant parts of their balance sheets at the Reserve Bank in a local RTGS system. So the US dollars were real US dollars. And then at some stage, post 2013, they migrated from independently managing their cash and nostros to
central bank.
To the central bank. And
okay, so you're saying that in itself meant that they
that was
no
the
longer...
fatal flaw.
Okay.
Because now the central bank had its hand in the cookie jar.
The RTGS. That's when we introduced the RTGS system.
And that is the fatal flaw. It had nothing to do with
the dollar itself.
The politicians in general. That singular move. If the banks had been adamant that we're not going to participate in this thing where these balances are going to sit at the central bank. We're just going to manage our balance sheets the way we've been doing quite nicely.
But Faro, that's a political decision. But remember, when the GNU came, without expressly saying that, they pretty much sidelined the central bank. And most of the central banking functions were actually being done by CBZ, if you still remember. Yeah. So it was CBZ as a commercial bank working with other banks to be able to move funds internally and outside. And I don't know if it was there was some roundtable and decision was made to sort of sideline the central bank, but whatever happened at the time.
Well, I can give you what happened at the time. There was the argument that since we have a new governor, so the argument was maybe the problem was gone. So now that we have a new governor, the new governor would manage better. So then let's take the lender of last resort back to the central bank and let's introduce an RTGS system that is backed by the RBZ, and that was
and there was the case made up.
Gentlemen, I'm being told that we're running out of time, but there's so much to discuss. So the thing that I want us to discuss now is actually government itself, government revenue. So if you look at government revenue during the GNU period, 2013 they were now collecting about 3.5 billion, but that's not the best that they did. It was actually 2015 when they collected 3.88, which is close to 4 billion, and that's actually the highest we've ever collected. So if you look at what we're collecting now, and it's distorted, but it would come to about 3.5 billion dollars, despite new taxes, despite hiking of taxes,
despite the exporting more. And growth.
Despite all that.
And how significant was the informal sector then? Because I think this has been the biggest feature when you try to compare the differences between now and then, that we have pretty much informalized the biggest.
But what we're saying is during that period, government itself was collecting, it was benefiting. It was actually collecting more. When our volumes, our GDP, everything was actually less. Without new taxes, without hiking new taxes, government of the day during that period was actually collecting more. Maybe the problem and the lesson that we need to learn is you can't collect and then spend it all on recurrent expenditure. But they were actually collecting more. Whereas now they're actually collecting less. So what has happened during that period is if you look at the Rwandese budget, the Rwandese budget is $4.7 billion. We're now on 4 billion. So we collect about 3.5 and then we borrow. That's the deficit is about 0.5. So about 4 billion. We're now, the government of the day is actually collecting far less than they did during that period. So this has actually hurt government itself. So I do not understand why government has gone out of its way to hurt itself, even introduced new taxes. Although to be fair, we then increased the number of civil servants. So to Rivaro's point, that what happened post 2013 is there was a bonanza because we had total control of the system. We actually introduced new civil servants, which we shouldn't have done. But the point I'm trying to make, and I want to hear what you guys think, is government was actually benefiting during that period. So let's park aside whether it was governance or the dollar that sustained that period. But government was actually benefiting. Why doesn't government go back to that period? If they are, in Ranga's corner, then it's governance. Just introduce the right governance, even with the Zim dollar, even in a multi-currency system, introduce the right governance, because it turns out you benefit as well. If you're on
my side of the spectrum,
then it's just introduce the dollar, because it turns out you also benefit.
Yeah, so
why is that obvious not so obvious?
So there's this mythology, and it doesn't only carry favor in the halls of government. A lot of people in the private sector believe this as well, although they won't actually go on record and articulate this, but they say this in private, that they think it's one of the reasons why there's belief in the idea that we should always have a Zim dollar is because of this thinking that because we will never have enough government revenue to do everything that government wants to do, you must always have this option to print. And they talk about countries in the West, the developed world, that run deficits, that quote unquote also print. Notwithstanding that the way those economies are structured and do things is very different from the way our economy works and the way we print here. So the thinking is that the government is much more flexible to do what it needs to do if it has the capacity to print. Mm-hmm. And I completely agree with your premise that one of the biggest winners, if we went back to dollarization, would be government. Because they would actually, I think our economy is bigger than it was when we took 3.88 billion in revenue.
It's more or less. It's more or less.
I think we differ there, but I suspect that they would actually collect much more in hard cash.
There will be more formalization of businesses.
And they would be in a much better place to actually restructure our foreign debt and raise money in global markets. So we would be so much better off. And even these things that, we had a debate many episodes ago about these infrastructure projects that we're doing, Arbitrage, Chirundi, that sort of thing, whether it makes sense to print to fund them, right? And, obviously it doesn't make sense to print to fund these things. But we would be able to actually raise money to fund, such infrastructure projects in a way that's sustainable if we were dollarized.
It's self-defeating. Why is government going against its own self-interest? Because it was actually collecting more.
So I would think the argument has always been one that Rufaro was putting across there, that dollarizing restrict them, it hamstrings them to, it limits them in terms of what they can do. And they want this ability to be able to, maybe in their mind it's not really printing, being able to borrow locally. And so it's something that you can only do when you've got your own currency. But I want to, I think my argument would be, look, if you have got the right framework, fiscal discipline, right governance, you should have an option to borrow locally and internationally. And I think it's actually possible. I think when you look at the infrastructure problems, so the infrastructure issues, ordinarily these are project finance sort of funded project. So there are institutions, like GNU, there was the resurfacing of a plantry to Mutare. Fine, we have done a Bay Bridge to Harare going to Chirundu, but I think I don't see why one would make an argument that even if that it comes at the cost of high inflation and debasing of your currency is still good. I think we just need to run our affairs.
So, Ranga, I want to articulate the question. Let me articulate the question better so that the audience are very clear. It's very clear that during the GNU, government was actually receiving more than now. And there was no hyperinflation. So why would government go out of their way to introduce a system? Doesn't matter.
Don't characterize it as GNU. Just say dollarization. Because if you put that label GNU, then people in government will say, no, we don't want that.
We don't. Okay, dollarization. Okay. Because his argument is it doesn't matter which political power is in power. That's all right.
Just call it dollarization.
Dollarization. Why would they go out of their way to hurt themselves? Where clearly they were receiving more. Where clearly they could. So to your point, when you look at construction, right? Construction industry, it was a 137 million economy in 2009. By 2014 or 2013-2014, it had increased fourfold to 426. So it actually benefited the most. And since then, it's been more or less flat. Or it has grown, but grown slightly. But if you think about it, so there was a lot more construction then. Perhaps the government of the day just didn't say, didn't have the propaganda to really speak so much. But there was a lot of growth there. But the point is,
so I think most
they can borrow internationally.
Yeah, I think most of
Why
that
are they
like
going against what's so obvious, that the current system does not help them. They're actually collecting far less with more taxes. Because remember, we didn't have the
2% IMT.
tax, IMT. We didn't have that. Which, by the way, was now contributing about, in the Zim era, it was now contributing about 11% of our tax revenues. We didn't have that. But we were collecting more. The civil servants were earning more. Never mind that it was consumptive, and I think that's a good point in which we can improve on. But why are they going against their own interest? Cronyism, corruption?
Yeah, there's corruption, but there's also this false premise, this false view that, sovereignty issues to do with sanctions, because the argument that you get is, no, we can't be using the USD because it's a currency. It's a hostile power. Yes, it's a currency that's originating from a hostile power. But it's not like this. The USDs that we have here, we're actually getting them from the US government.
I find that argument absolutely hilarious.
It's actually counterproductive. And I would say, look, in as much as I'm making a case that there's nothing wrong with introducing or making the Zim dollar the sole currency, but I would say there's a timing issue that needs to be dealt with. Okay. And also there's also a process. So you can't achieve that by forcing it on people. Because like what we've seen with 2008, 2009, even without an official announcement that we were dollarizing, the economy
the market had already dollarized. Yeah. Okay, so that's a good segue. Which is the next question that we must cover, is what will happen if the US dollar is banned? So we wake up tomorrow and the US dollar has been banned.
That's another fairy tale.
Okay, please expand on that.
The idea that the state can wake up tomorrow and actually ban the US dollar and then it will go away. It's another fairy tale,
No, it's possible.
Okay, no, wait. Let's give him a chance to expand on his fairy tale allegation.
Because the US dollar is embedded in the psyche of Zimbabweans. That this is real value, this is real money, and if there's no viable alternative, and you wake up and you say so what's the alternative? What are people going to do? They're not going to just wake up, take all the cash in their mattresses and surrender it and say, look, this is our new reality. We have to work with this.
Well, they can take the $1 billion that's in the formal sector, and that can be liquidated into Zim dollars. So the formal businesses that are using that $1 billion could wake up one morning and they don't, and all exporters will need to surrender 100% what they're earning, and they get a Zim dollar value.
Yeah, so look, I think for the formal sector, for the mines and the big corporates, that will become reality for them. They will have to work with this in that dispensation with that currency. But for most of the economy, and at the last count, I think SimStats hasn't updated us with more recent information, but at the last disclosure, our economy was 76% USD, 24% Zim dollar, and it was trending in the dollarization direction. So what will simply happen is you'll have these two, it will be a surreal environment with two universes, where you have a formal sector that will probably be shrinking and dying because we've never managed the Zim dollar well. So there's no reason to believe that if we woke up tomorrow and made it compulsory for everybody in the formal sector to deal with Zim dollars, that it should be good for them.
So if I capture your argument, you're saying that it will be the informalization of
the country.
Of the country.
Yes.
So if they force it upon us, Zimplats would have a problem, Unki would have a problem,
Delta will have a problem, OK will have a problem, but the touch shops are going to still be there.
They will still be there, yeah.
And the National Metros Bank, it will actually be a boon for the National Mattress Bank.
Okay, fantastic. Let's hear your argument. What will happen if we wake up tomorrow and the government bans US dollar in our formal system?
It will reverse everything that they're trying to achieve. Because I think when it comes to an issue, to the currency, what they just need to foster is confidence, build trust around the currency. And building the trust around the currency, you must be able to say, look, this is what you have done. And you can actually use the Zim dollar or US dollar whenever you want. They're interchangeable.
Free exchange.
Free exchange. And don't feel pressured. Because you know what, the reason why the informal sector has been thriving on USDs is because there's this whole depth in trust and confidence. So there's a whole economy which is underground. There's a lot of money, maybe you can't quantify it, it could be $1 billion or more, that's outside the formal system. So that first and foremost, there is no directive that could actually command that money to come out of the mattresses into the banks before you collect it. So by banning, what they would have achieved is actually to increase that informalization.
Okay.
So it's not the right thing to. I think they have to do it in a way that demonstrate that, look, we have no problems with Zim dollar USD operating at the same time, but we have support the economy is operating in such a pace and fashion that the Zim dollar has become attractive again. So you go to the bank, like right now, if in addition to what they have achieved and the rate is close to 5,000, they would say anyone that has got Zim dollar, because we're saying there's a shortage of Zim dollars, right? Anyone that has got Zim dollars, just walk into any bank, exchange them for the USDs. And then we give all these corporates that are looking for, here they are desperately looking for Zim dollars.
Okay.
So the moment you do that, and then it works, you do that for a week, for 2 weeks, people start saying, okay, maybe there's no need for me to be keeping my money under the mattress. But if you start issuing directives and whatever, we are just sending out a signal that, you know what, we know that you don't like this thing, but we'll force you to like it.
Okay. So I think on that note, because I'm told we've actually.
Well, the producers here, we can go for as long
yeah.
as we want. So what this guy is saying doesn't matter. Tell producer, we've got the firepower here.
I thought I was the only person that can,
when you're on this side of the counter,
I lose my rights and privileges.
And a lot of your rights. But let me summarize the 2 points. And maybe because I have the last word, I can then chip in with what I think. But I think the arguments that I'm seeing from both sides is, if we start with Ranga's argument. So Ranga's argument is there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a Zim dollar, but you need the right governance structure. And if you don't have the right governance structure, then you're going to have problems. And there will be recurring problems. And the right governance structure is fiscal, monetary, as well as exchange market.
If you say governance, you're going to annoy some people. Just say discipline. Say discipline.
No. That's not what Ranga said. That's not what Ranga said. That's your argument. That's not Ranga's argument. Ranga's argument is around governance. And he's saying if you have the right governance in monetary and fiscal and exchange rate and in the goods market, then things will actually work. It doesn't matter what the underlying currency is. That's his argument. So to extend that argument, he's actually arguing that even if you have the Zim dollar, there is trust and faith that you have to instill in the market. You can't force people. He's actually saying, let's have a free market. If you believe in the Zim dollar, put it in there, in the basket of goods, and with time, if there is faith and confidence, if you have import cover, if you have reserves, if you're managing fiscally and monetarily...
If you believe in fairy tales.
Then if you have a line of these things that you must do, then you will see that it will work. People will start using the Zim dollar. But the worst thing you could do is to actually ban US dollar. Then people will just ignore you. And it will cause the informalization of the market. And on the other side, what Rufaro is arguing, Rufaro is saying that continuously we live in fairy tales. We're very good at propaganda, in saying all the right things, but we haven't done the right things. And because we haven't done the right things, we have suffered from hyperinflation in the last 15 years 3 times. That's world record beating. So there is no reason for us to believe that government will do all these things that Ranga says we must do. And the easier thing to do is for government to accept what the market has chosen, because dollarization is inevitable. We know that for the last 4 years, government has been fighting dollarization, but dollarization has been inevitable. And it culminates in Zimstats telling us that 74% of the trade is actually in dollars. And all government has done is to just formalize that. So what he's saying is, let's create the right structure to ensure that what are the lessons that we could learn from 2009 to 2013. So for example, when we then gave the rights to central bank, we saw the decimation of
savings.
So maybe this time around, we need to be wary of that. Maybe our dollarization needs to be in a particular way. My argument, ladies and gentlemen, is perhaps we could borrow from both Ranga and Rufaro. And the middle of the ground is a currency board, because it ensures that Rufaro gets what he wants, which is discipline. That's his word. It also ensures that we get what Ranga wants, which is governance. So when you have the governance and the discipline and it's auditable, our reserves are sitting somewhere internationally. This is nothing unusual. If you look at Germany, after they went through the bout of hyperinflation, they kept their gold in Fort Knox in America. If you look at China, half of its reserves are not sitting in China. They're actually sitting abroad. And the reason why they're sitting abroad is because they buttress that confidence and that governance that we're talking about. Right now, nobody believes the central bank. Nobody believes the central bank. And it's incumbent upon the central bank to go out of its way to be audited, to have its reserves away from Zimbabwe. And if people, the markets, can see that those are the reserves, then we will start seeing the formalization of the dollars. Because what will happen is we'll be able to use your Zim dollars within Zimbabwe, and only when you want to go outside of Zimbabwe, you should be able to walk into a bank and you'll be able to exchange your Zim dollars for your US dollars. And the person who's giving you and who's guaranteeing that you get your US dollars, it's not the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. It's not Treasury in Zimbabwe. It's ADB or is the South African Reserve Bank that will say, yes, indeed, the Zim dollar that you have is fully backed by this US dollar and we will give you because you need it. So it's how do we marry both and we get a currency board. That's my argument. Let's hear your argument. Let's continuously have these arguments. Let's not abrogate our right to have these arguments, because these arguments are being had at policy level, and what we need to do is to impact policy. Continue the discussions. Let's hear your views. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful evening. We're going out for dinner.
Yes, we are.
You're paying. I'm looking forward to it. Have yourself a wonderful weekend. Cheers.
Cheers.